Dear Minister Konders, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 8th Ministerial Plenary Meeting of the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum. Thank you all for being here today and for your involvement throughout the year in the activities of our forum. I would like to warmly thank the Netherlands, our partner in the GCTF co-chairmanship, for another year of exemplary collaboration. We very much look forward to pursuing our fruitful cooperation within the framework of a second mandate during the biennium 2018-2020. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as much as we are honored to welcome you here, we would have preferred meeting you in other circumstances, where terrorism and violent extremism would not be representing such persistent and growing threat. The list of terrorism and violent extremism victims exponentially grows as innocent lives continue to perish in the ever more frequent deadly attacks. In tribute to the memory of every victim, our duty is to remain attached to our values and make more efforts to counter these threats. In developing our responses, we must keep an eye on the shift in the terrorist group's strategies and counter the influence of their narrative on the most vulnerable individuals. We must also fully engage all stakeholders, government services, NGOs, civil society, media, the private sector, internet providers, along the line of a whole-of-society approach. Each of these actors should be made aware of their role and responsibility in building a resilient society and spreading of our shared values, namely respect, openness, dialogue, and freedom. No divisive discourse should be tolerated, as it is counterproductive and does not serve our common objective. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, within the GCTF, we recognize the importance of consolidating existing partnerships and creating new ones, and the necessity of establishing networks of practitioners for a more sustainable impact of the actions we undertake to develop and build CT and CVE capacity where appropriate. Our primary objective remains to support and revitalize the implementation of the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, the relevant Security Council resolutions, as well as GCTF's good practices and recommendations. In this context, we welcome the reform of the UN counterterrorism architecture and the establishment of the UN Office for Counterterrorism. As GCTF co-chairs, we pledge to support the newly established OCT in its central role of providing enhanced capacity building, assistance to member states, and to constantly work towards the preservation and development of UN GCTF is a long-established and mutually reinforcing relationship in collaboration with Under-Secretary General Mr. Vladimir Voronkov. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the GCTF has also sought to revise its structure to instill a new dynamic into the forum, allowing for a more effective response to the challenges prompted by the rapid and constant developments both in terrorism and counter-terrorism environments. The involvement and interest shown by GCTF members during the forum's restructuring process is additional evidence of the relevance of this exercise. By streamlining the thematic working groups and focusing our action on countering violent extremism, criminal justice and the rule of law, and foreign terrorist fighters, we are striving for more coherence and coordination to avoid duplication of efforts. However, We would like to insist on the fact that this is not in no way excludes the possibility of addressing other issues through standalone initiatives. Initiatives launched during the previous years have demonstrated their relevance and the anticipatory vision of GCTF members with regard to important questions such as foreign terrorist fighters, terrorist use of internet, kidnapping for ransom, life cycle of radicalization to violence, border security, supporting victims of terrorism, and soft targets. This meeting is an opportunity to commend the members who initiated these work streams for their efforts and for contributing to keeping our forum at the vanguard of the international CT efforts, while preserving its vitality and flexibility. We encourage all GCTF members to engage in new initiatives. In addition, and in line with the inclusive approach advocated by GCTF, we have decided to expand the geographical scope of its two regional working groups, which will now work to strengthen and develop capacity in East and West African region. Indeed, we cannot and should not turn a blind eye on the alarming trends in Africa and allow for the promising development efforts of African countries to be challenged by the spread of terrorism. The GCTF should fully contribute to reinforcing the capacities in the African continent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, through its working groups, initiatives, and inspired institutions, as well as its fruitful partnership with various international, regional, and sub-regional organizations, the GCTF has succeeded in positioning itself as an international productive and efficient platform for cooperation. It is our duty to consolidate the forum's position of a catalyzing agent for anticipatory efforts in CT and CVE. Morocco and the Netherlands will be honored to pursue these efforts as GCTF co-chairs during the next biennium. We are humbled by the support received after the announcement of the extension of our mandate. This trust mark reinforces our determination to work harder for the promotion of the GCTF's role and mission and for the development of our work through, first, further encouraging international, regional, sub-regional and national implementation of the forum's framework documents. Second, maintaining the focus on emerging trends and dynamics related to terrorism and extremism. Third, adapting the forum's orientation to the realities on the ground. And fourth, strengthening and deepening partnerships with international, regional and sub-regional actors. If the initiatives and working groups are the working engines of the GCTF, our role as co-chairs is to provide support and coordination to facilitate smooth functioning of our structure. We are and we remain committed to serve all the members' contributions and efforts to achieve the objectives that we set for the GCTF 6 years ago. Our priority will continue to be the promotion of civil cooperation and ensurance that global counter-terrorism measures are complementary and result-oriented, as well as respectful of our guiding principles, namely respect of international human rights and the rule of law. Our ambition will be to open up to new opportunities to preserve the GCTF's responsiveness and its ability to inform and guide states in the development of effective policies, guidelines, programs, and approaches to terrorism, extremism, and the many challenges inherent to them. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year we have sought to renew our engagement to our founding principles by suggesting the adoption of a ministerial statement following our meeting. This document highlights the key elements that we wish to direct our focus on, namely sustained cooperation at all levels with various partners and the implementation of relevant framework documents, good practices and recommendations. I would like to thank you all once again for supporting our work and to assure you all of our resolve to reinforce the efficiency of the GCTF, preserve its flexibility and proactivity, and strengthen its role as a catalyst of CT and CVE capacity building activities where adequate. I thank you. I give now the floor to my friend and co-chair, Minister Koenders. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Minister Bourita. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, we are going to look at a small movie, just to start up.
I believe you are aware of why you are here.
Where are my daughters?
They're safe and well with the Child Protection Services. So, explain to me what it was that made you decide to come back.
It was completely different from what we imagined. Life is hard there. I was just so tired when we finally made it to the embassy. I don't have my passport. We escaped, we fled the war. We barely survived.
Okay. Are there other family members?
No, it's just us.
I mean, she has a rather vague story. We need to determine that they are who they say they are. I think the baby has never been registered. But if she is a citizen, we need to help her.
Okay. Do we know her? Could she be a threat? And who do we need to contact to check her story?
We were brought here by the police and my girls were taken away from me.
Were you forced?
There was no choice.
There always is. We sometimes just choose to ignore it.
I just wanted to keep my family together.
Why didn't you tell the embassy about Abby, your son?
I didn't know where he was. I was afraid that they wouldn't want to help me.
This is your new passport, cash, and your local contact. You'll get further instructions once you've reached your destination. Try to catch a ride from cars and trucks. Avoid airports and trains.
It's hard to fully check her story.
I don't believe her. She said smugglers, but that requires lots of money, and I doubt she had any.
So, the end of the week, the weapons will be delivered.
What do you need me to do?
I need you to check out the location and help me with some logistics.
Okay.
Police! Show me your hands! Please! Show me your hands! Show me your hands!
Were you a part of the terrorist group over there?
No. Again, no.
Is that so? We have multiple messages and pictures you've sent to your friends.
Well, doesn't everybody? Does everybody also participate in fighting? We have documents and Facebook videos of you shooting assault rifles. I didn't do anything. We have information that suggests that you were sent here with a specific task. This is ridiculous.
You have been seen on multiple security cameras around the boulevard taking pictures.
So, how should we interpret that? You lived for 2 years in an area where every 15-year-old gets terrorist training. What are our options?
Well, seems to me we have plenty of evidence against the boy.
He is still a minor.
Yes, but that doesn't change the facts, does it?
No. But it may change the way a judge looks at it. He may need special care.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, after viewing this short film, you might think you've come to the wrong room. It has all the suspense of a trailer for the latest Netflix series, doesn't it? Did it really happen like that, you might wonder? Well, no, it's fiction, but it draws on a reality we know all too well. That is what already could have happened and might still happen. In fact, we all wish it were just a movie, not the reality of today's world, where this threat is very real. And so do the families of the victims of the many attacks around the globe that couldn't be prevented. In Baghdad and Berlin, in Istanbul and Barcelona, in Nice and Abuja, in Brussels and Jakarta. They wish the attack that changed their lives were just a movie. Instead, they have to live with the consequences every day. The pain inflicted by attacks that couldn't be prevented on families, on communities, on nations, and on all of humanity is all too real. And we have to be realistic. The threat is there to stay. That is why we have stepped up our efforts over the last 6 years in the GCTF and will continue to do so in the years ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 6 years since this forum was created, a lot has been achieved. Our first achievement was coming together around a common challenge in a very action-oriented, practical and determined manner. We all invested in this forum and its working groups because we had a shared goal. Now, of course, meetings do not equal results. But in international relations, especially these days, the GCTF is quite an accomplishment. It tells us something about the nature of the threat. It also tells us something about who you all are, professionals with the same goal in mind. And this goal is not political. A common enemy quickly unites the most hardened opponents. And we have to keep up together the spirit, and I believe we will. We have to because we are fighting an agile monster. Over the past 6 years, the threat has evolved. We've had to evolve with it, and more difficult, stay ahead of the curve. The terrorist threat mutates constantly, like a virus. Just look at foreign terrorist fighters and how they have changed over the years. First, it was mainly young people leaving home to fight for the caliphate, or Al-Shabaab, or terrorist groups in Southeast Asia. Then came the threat posed by returnees who spread fear and an ideology of violence. And now we are seeing attacks carried out with garden variety weapons, like kitchen knives and trucks. They are being committed by homegrown terrorists inspired by terrorist ideologies and making use of organized crime networks. ISIS has wasted no time in claiming them as their own. It shows us that terrorism is constantly innovating, making itself immune to new cures. And if we are realistic, it's a virus we'll probably never wipe out entirely. But we need to contain it. And in this fight, the importance of sharing information can again not be overestimated. My own country has greatly benefited from increased information sharing, which was kick-started by international fora like this one, the GCTF. But if we want to stay ahead of the curve, we need to constantly review and renew our approach. We need to be honest to ourselves and to one another. What worked 6 years ago may not work today. There is no magic solution when it comes to fighting terrorism. Terror and innovation is a very, very dangerous combination. And we need to be brave enough to acknowledge when measures are not effective. We knew from the beginning this couldn't be a talking shop. We structured our work according to the ambitious principle of the 5 R's. And these remain relevant today as we take stock of what has been achieved. I believe we have reason to be proud, and if you permit me, I go very quickly through each of the 5. First, results. We all agreed that we needed to put our money where our mouth is, and we have delivered. We've developed a toolkit for frontline practitioners containing very concrete measures and recommendations to assist them in their very daily work. Under the leadership of the United Kingdom, and I'm very glad that Boris is here, we set up a task force to assist countries in developing national counter-terrorism action plans. We must continue to translate the GCTF's work and good practices into concrete projects at the local level. Global challenges need to be addressed at the local level. Second are resources. We identified areas where additional resources were needed. Together we've invested more than $400 million in capacity building. And we've set up an international donor coordination mechanism. Now, more needs to be done to keep the forum vibrant. We need your ongoing contributions to support the implementing partners. Third, relations. We have a solid base with the 30 GCTF members, but we've done outreach beyond this group of 30 as well. More than 60 non-member countries and organizations have participated in GCTF working groups, expanding our impact and reach. And of course, the United Nations, and I'm very glad the UN Under-Secretary General is here, remains a key partner in the GCTF's work. We're looking forward to the years of cooperation to come. Next are reinforcement. We greatly enhanced internal cooperation, beefed up procedures, sharpened our focus, made connections, and strengthened the cooperation between working groups. And we ensured a closer link with partners on the ground who can be our allies in implementing our work in the regions. And then the last R, not least, renewal. We launched new initiatives to respond to new terrorist threats, came up with new ideas, and refreshed the structure of our working groups when needed. Mr. Burita was just talking about it. This year, the Forum is launching 3 new initiatives on the nexus between terrorism and organized crime, on families of returning fighters, and on homegrown violent extremism. And I'm proud that the Netherlands will continue as co-chair with Morocco for the next 2 years. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, let me briefly go back to this very short film we just saw. Of course, it was made for our entertainment. It was designed to take our deliberations into the real world, where we want them to be. And that means diving into the work at hand, exchanging information, deciding if we're still on the right track, and finding workable solutions for the very real dilemmas and risks we all face. In short, staying ahead of the curve. And to help us do just that, an extended version of this film was screened in the Coordinating Commission 2 days ago, where we had scenario-based discussions. Difficult questions emerged, like how do we keep striving for a balanced whole-of-government approach? We need to stay focused on prevention as well. What should be done with returning families? They can be victims, but they may also pose a very grave security risk to our societies. The risk assessment needs to be in place from the start. How do we improve information sharing on the movement of returnees? We need to gather evidence which may also be needed for prosecution of returning fighters. And very importantly, how do we respect also the rule of law in all this? We need to safeguard fundamental freedoms such as the right to freedom of the press and freedom of expression. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I think there is one question we should all be asking ourselves when we look at that very short movie. Where do I fit in this scenario? What about this forum and our work? Indeed, what about our own roles? One thing is clear to me. None of us here can tackle the challenges posed by terrorism alone. Maybe in a future version of our film, we need to focus on whether we are making the best use of the new opportunities created by this forum. The GCTF is a reservoir of knowledge and very, very practical experience. Are we using it to the fullest? And if not, do we need to change our approach? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the answer to those questions is in all our hands. And here today and every day in our work, we've come a long way. Let's keep it up. Thank you very much. I have now the honor to give the floor to the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, Mr. Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much, Bert, and good morning, everybody. I represent a country that suffered a terrorist attack in our capital city, London, as recently as last Friday, so I'm absolutely under no illusions about the scale of the threat. and nor do I have any doubt that closer international cooperation is essential if we are going to protect our citizens. And this forum helps our nations to share and to promote best practice, and that's why I'm so glad to be here today with you, Nasser, and with you, Bert, and thank you very much for your co-chairing. Britain is privileged to have co-chaired the Working Group on Countering Violent Extremism, along with our colleagues from the United Arab Emirates. And as we hand over to the new co-chairs, I'd like to offer a few reflections on our work and two particular initiatives. First, Britain has joined hands with our Swiss colleagues to develop a framework recommendation on how to prevent and counter violent extremism online, and that's being launched today. Secondly, the UK and UAE launched a task force on national action plans endorsed at the last ministerial session in 2016. This task force has already helped Somalia, Kenya, Nigeria and Pakistan to publish their own action plans. And I would encourage all GCTF members to draw on the knowledge and expertise of this task force and to provide it with practical and financial support. Britain is delighted to hand over the chairmanship of the Working Group on Countering Violent Extremism to Australia and Indonesia. I would also like to recognise the good work done by all of us on the new framework documents that we endorse today, covering the protection of soft targets and recommendations on how to prevent and counter violent extremism and terrorism online. I would particularly highlight the obligations of the private sector, because the task of defeating terrorism cannot be left to governments alone. The more we all know the danger signs, the more our instinct is to see something and say something, then the greater our chances of deterring terrorists and saving lives in the event of an attack. Perhaps most importantly, Britain and our partners will continue to focus on preventing terrorists from using the internet. Our Prime Minister, Theresa May, will join President Macron of France and Prime Minister Gentiloni of Italy to co-chair an event this afternoon, bringing together representatives of social media companies. What is needed is nothing less than a global effort to galvanise the companies and governments to close down safe spaces where terrorists operate online. And I would like to offer Britain's support to the United States and Jordan, who will co-chair the Working Group on Foreign Terrorist Fighters. As we saw in the film just now, but the only implausibility in that film was Amber, is of course the name of our Home Secretary, who leads in counter-terrorism for the United Kingdom. I think you might want to change the name in future. Otherwise, I thought it was perfect. And the new initiative on foreign terrorist fighter families. Many of our countries are threatened by people who gained combat experience with Daesh. And we've seen what's happening. They're coming back. And we must all work together to reduce this danger. I welcome the plan to update UN Resolution 2178 to ensure that our international response continues to meet the threat. Finally, the GCTF works best when it works in partnership with other international organizations, particularly the UN. I'd like, therefore, to congratulate Vladimir Voronkov on his appointment to lead the new UN Counter-Terrorism Office. We look forward to working with him and other branches of the UN, including the Counter-Terrorism Executive Directorate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Boris. I'd like to turn now to the United States and introduce Mr. Tom Bossert, who will be presenting the Antalya Memorandum on the protection of soft target in a counter-terrorism context. We're very happy you're here. Mr. Bossert is also Home Security Advisor to President Trump.
Thank you, Bert, and thank you, Nasser. I appreciate your opening remarks. I'm here having spoken to the President this morning. I told him that Rex Tillerson couldn't be here. He said, good, Tom, go and let them know what you think. So I will tell you that I've thrown Rex's remarks out and I'll deliver my own, but it turns out they're quite similar. And I second the motion to change the name of Amber in the video so as to preserve my relationship with the Home Secretary. So thank you very much for hosting this important meeting. I also thank the other ministers and senior officials here in this room for the discussion this morning. The United States is here particularly because we are committed to stopping terrorists wherever they may be, and we hope to partner in new and practical ways with each nation and organization here. We all have the same goal of keeping our people safe, and I believe President Trump's message yesterday in his remarks was quite clear. Thank you for your contributions financially to this effort. I think that's a very practical step that he appreciates greatly. And I'd like to first, if I could, start by giving my impression of where we stand from a counterterrorism perspective before I then deliver some remarks. It seems my honest assessment of the terrorist threat is that the terrorist threat we face now, 16 years post 9/11, it continues in more locations and in different forms. And the threat is obviously real, significant, and should not be misunderstood. In many ways, it seems worse, Bert, to your remarks. It also seems decentralized and persistent. It seems to be spreading into things that become more pernicious and difficult for our law enforcement intelligence officers to find and interdict. Now, that said, let me highlight some successes. I think the number of foreign terrorist fighters traveling to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS is down significantly since the beginning of 2016. This decline has been dramatic, prolonged, and geographically widespread, and it's coupled with battlefield losses that are finding ISIS on its heels. It is finding ISIS in a position where it's harder to replenish their ranks, and we are shrinking their control of the physical caliphate with the assistance of many of you in this room. This decline is due to other factors as well, including military gains, but also the enhanced commitments that we've seen by partners to implement UN Security Council Resolution 2178. Thank you to Boris for his reference to renewing it and its spirit. Tougher border security and the good practices laid down in the Forum's Hague-Marrakesh Memorandum as well. Yet the United States and our partners around the world continue to face significant challenges from foreign fighters from Iraq and Syria returning home, ISIS-inspired, enabled, and directed attacks, often involving everyday objects that have been turned into weapons, as we've seen, unfortunately, of late, and terrorist efforts to exploit new technologies, unmanned aerial aircraft, encrypted communications, difficulties for us to challenge and tackle. We also observe the very real and consistent, persistent threat to our global aviation network. I think that with the work of everyone in this room and with some of the leadership this year from the United States, we are moving towards a globally enhanced, improved security posture in our global aviation network. And I would call on us to continue our focus on that challenge and hopefully move towards increased global standards in that regard. I hope to see some more progress in that regard over the coming 3 to 4 months. We take these threats very seriously. We've acted to improve upon them, but today the United States has made returning foreign fighters a particular priority, and these battle-hardened terrorists commit obviously more vicious and often more effective attacks at home, and they tend to be more deadly than the attacks perpetrated by the inexperienced or untrained operatives. So kudos to the film. We're encouraged that foreign members have supported the United States and Jordan to be the new co-chairs of the Foreign Terrorist Fighter Working Group. The working group is dedicated to coordinating the growing number of civilian-focused efforts at the national, regional, and international levels to stem the flow of foreign fighters and counter the threat posed by returning foreign fighters. Accordingly, I am pleased to announce 2 new forum initiatives in support of our efforts. 1, addressing the challenge of returning families of foreign fighters, or the Families Initiative, and secondly, addressing the growing threat from homegrown terrorists. This homegrown terrorist initiative will allow us to work together in ways to tackle this particularly difficult domestic challenge as it confronts each of us at home and collectively represents an international threat. The Families Initiative, co-led by the United States and the Netherlands, will aim to raise awareness, identify needs, and leverage expertise to address challenges associated with returning family members of foreign fighters. The Families Initiative will produce a set of internationally recognized, non-binding good practices for authorities to draw upon as they help family members of foreign fighters who are potentially traumatized, potentially radicalized, or vulnerable to radicalization after exposure to atrocities in international conflict zones. The Homegrown Terrorists Initiative, which the United States and Morocco will co-lead, in coordination with the International Institute for Justice and the Rule of Law, will bring together a range of actors to develop good practices, to identify potential homegrown terrorists, prevent them from committing attacks or inspiring others to do so, and develop solutions to address this growing challenge. Many recent attacks in Western Europe, as each of you know, were committed by terrorists who did not travel to conflict zones and were instead radicalized at home. Tracking and stopping homegrown terrorists will continue to be a difficult problem, and we must do more to identify these threats ahead of time, to perhaps even make our law enforcement activities a little bit more sensitive to these concerns. And we must do more identifying these threats in a way that can stop future attacks as opposed to identifying future attackers. We must also strengthen our collective counterterrorism efforts on sharing information to limit terrorist travel, including passenger name record data. That PNR agreement process is important. Sharing that information remains important. Any change in that posture would not be welcome. You've heard of our Homeland Security Presidential Directive 6. I was around at its creation. I'm back in government now. I very much hope to continue our PNR cooperation. We recognize that al-Qaeda and ISIS operatives, including returning foreign fighters and homegrown terrorists, will continue to plot against soft targets such as supporting venues, theaters, and hotels. That is why we worked with Turkey over the past year on the protection of soft targets in a counterterrorism context initiative, which led the development of the Antalya Memorandum that will be endorsed at today's meeting. Thank you to Turkey. The Antalya Memorandum represents the most current thinking on the challenge of protecting soft targets, such as the malls and restaurants, stadiums where we gather to shop, dine, conduct business. The good practices put forth in the memorandum reflect the collective expertise of over 150 public and private practitioners from across law enforcement, intelligence, emergency management, industry, and related fields. These practices can be applied globally and should be applied, and are intended to guide government and industry alike in developing and refining our policies and practices and approaches to soft target protection. These practices will also provide a basis for ongoing international engagement, assistance, and training to enhance the security and resilience of potential soft targets. In conclusion, of course, all this work depends on states making use of it. That's where the UN and other multilateral bodies come in. UN agencies are important partners in building member state capacity in line with the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy and this forum's good practices, which support that strategy. The United States has long advocated for improving counterterrorism coordination within the UN, so our efforts avoid duplication and are effective in their gathering and targeting and implementation. We look forward to working together to advance our shared goal of defeating the global terrorist threat that confronts each of us. I'd like to end by thanking not only each of you, but adding a personal thank you to Minister Kunders for your leadership. I appreciate it. It is now my honor to turn the floor over to the Foreign Minister of Turkey for his remarks. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, since this forum was established, we have mobilized our resources to address the threat of terrorism and violent extremism in a holistic manner. We complied more than 20 GCTF good practices. Last year, these practices were brought under an umbrella, namely GCTF Life Cycle Toolkit. These GCTF tools aim to help design better national, regional, and collective